Ladies and gentlemen, some housekeeping information to start with. English to Italian to English simultaneous interpreting is available. You can select your language from the globe at the bottom right, and you may ask questions to the panelists during the webinar by using the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions during the webinar, we will do that later in the next days. So this year as well, Unione Oli Palma Sostenibile Italiana participates in the festival Sviluppo Sostenibile promoted by ASviS with 3 events online to help knowledge and awareness of sustainable development systems and share and stimulate political ideas in line with Agenda 2020 and promote an active and constructive dialogue on the challenges connected to sustainable development of the palm oil supply chain. Today, we'll be talking about a very hot topic, the new community regulation on zero deforestation, EUDR, and its implications for the palm oil certified sustainable palm oil supply chain. We'll be talking about that in the upcoming webinars as well, and then there will be a further webinar in some months' time when the information is even more detailed. We will illustrate and discuss the impacts for operators and control bodies. Let's say that we can also talk about innovative solutions in line with the new regulations, including case studies and best practices. So we will also listen to the point of view of WWF, one of the founding members of RSPO. Today, we'll have 4 experts, Professor Davide Matteo Pettenella of the University of Padua, Department of Territory and Agro-Forestry Systems, Dr. Maria Vincenza Chiriacò, a senior researcher at the Euro-Mediterranean Center for Climate Change, the Cmcc Foundation, Dr. Luca Foreste, an expert of Sattelligence, Dr. Niels Wieland, CEO Sattelligence, and finally, Dr. Eva Lessi, Head of Sustainability of WWF Italy. Let's start with Professor Pettenella, who teaches at the Faculty of Forestry of University of Padua and is responsible for the Land Environment Resource Health PhD and coordinates the roundtable for the National Forestry Policy and is past president of the Forest QRC Italia, the system for certifying the sustainability of forestry products. He is a great national and international researcher on the topics of forestry resources management and has worked for many Italian and other foundations and has participated in the activities of FAO and the Ministries for Transition Economy, and he's published over 500 scientific papers. Over to you, Professor. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction. Now I'm going to share my screen. There we are. Bear with me for a moment. Can you see it properly? Yes, we can. Okay, perfect. As you can see, this presentation was done in collaboration with a number of researchers who work with me, Andrighetto, Bausano, and Masiero. Now then, there are 3 parts in my presentation. First, the goals and the implementation path of this new regulation. I will briefly hint at the implementation manners and some open questions for the implementation of this regulation. And then I will talk about other initiatives of the European Commission in order to improve the environmental communication methods. I don't have much time, and many of the slides are hidden. If you want to have a more precise description of my topics, the slides can be downloaded, including the hidden ones, from the internet. So let us now take a look at the goals and implementation path. First, we'll be talking about the fundamental topic addressed by the regulation, i.e. deforestation and forest degradation. The data of the recent past is fairly dramatic and significant. An official estimate by the European Commission about the deforestation between 2005 and 2018 talks about 110,000 hectares. 95% of these destruction effects are connected to the production of 10 assets or products, significantly imported by also, or better, from also the European. In particular, you can see the most significant products in terms of deforestation impact, and 75% of the total impact is connected to soybean, palm oil, woody products, and cattle meat. In collaboration with the Joint Research Center of ISPRA of the European Commission, we've carried out a more detailed piece of research on the impacts in terms of deforestation and due to the imports of several products. You can see the recent, the most recent data relating to palm oil. So as you can see, there is a fairly positive trend in terms of reduction. Now, if you take a look at the 4 main quarters in the EU, it's less than 1,000 hectares of deforestation caused per year, with Italy, that is in green, that has a significant role in these terms, even though it's not the single most important one. These import flows in the European Union and in the 4 main importers are connected to 3 main categories of final use of the products. And it is interesting to notice that for Italy, the main driver of deforestation processes is not the food sector, but rather that of energy. 243 hectares. This is the average for the period from 2004 to 2020, and this is has decreased over the last years due to the phenomena that we've seen. And this relates to the energy uses. Now then, on these topics, the European Commission has focused through a regulation that tends to reduce deforestation and forest degradation process. It's interesting to remember that, in short, we talk about deforestation, but the focus is also on another very important phenomenon, i.e. the deforestation of existing forests. Specifically, the EUDR aims to reduce by 72,000 hectares of forest surface the degradation by 2030. Remember that we talked about 220,000 hectares. And this would also entail, quite obviously, a reduction of the emissions of greenhouse gases, in particular CO2 in the atmosphere, and a potential annual saving, since we connect a ton of carbon issued to a unit value in terms of saving of around 3.2 billion euros. Now then, a very important point, a very critical innovative point of this regulation is that it also considers forest degradation. And quite obviously, the regulation for the very first time in terms of regulatory text internationally, well, for the first time, it has defined forest degradation. For now, they talk about structural change of the forest cover as conversion of primary forests or conversion of naturally renewed forests. So the description is fairly generic. bear in mind that the vast majority of forests, for example, in Italy, are based on forms of natural regeneration. Now then, in the introduction of the regulation, it is stated that the European Commission will move towards the ad hoc definition of forest degradation in a more analytical manner, probably also through mapping systems. The process through which we have arrived at this document, at this regulation, was a long drawn out one. It started in November 2001, and essentially it ended in April this year, even though most especially in terms of implementation methods, something still has to be clarified. But significant changes have been made to the initial draft. I'll name two. The regulation will concern 6 products: bovine, meat, soya, bean, palm oil, coffee, cocoa, and wood. In the case of wood, as a matter of fact, this goes back to the EUDR, the timber regulation, as adapted and changed in a broader context. But to these products, in the process of definition, rubber was introduced, and there's more attention to the social topics when it comes to preparing the systems for controlling deforestation and degradation. There will be more steps to be taken, like formal approval by the European Council, and then it will be necessary to operationalize more practical and concrete aspects by the end of 2024 in view of the final implementation of the regulation, most especially when the member states will have implemented the internal control initiatives. So they will have defined the competent control authorities. They will have defined also the risk rating countries, and they will have specified the types of products, which, by the way, are fairly well defined. And this is the annex to the regulation, and it's about what we mean by products of the palm oil plantations. Now then, talking about the methods of implementation and open issues. What does the implementation of this regulation have to guarantee and demonstrate? Well, it will be necessary to have the documentation to prove that the semi-finished and finished products that enter the market of the European Union are deforestation-free, including the forest degradation-free definition. And this starting from the 31st of December 2020 as a reference year, in order to demonstrate that the products are deforestation-free. It will be necessary to guarantee that the legislation of the production country has been complied with. And on top of that, it will be necessary to have in place a system of due diligence. Now then, explaining a due diligence system is very complex, but in any case, let's remember the 3 fundamental pillars of this system. The first, the collection of information on the origin of the product. And here the regulation specifies there will be a report on that during the meeting. And it specifies that it will be necessary to geolocate the origin of the products that will be put in the European market. And the second pillar is a risk assessment. And this will have to be done in relation to a ranking of the countries. I'll come to that in a moment. And as regards the risk components, it will be necessary to also consider such aspects as are connected to the social conditions and the presence of indigenous populations that may claim rights of use of the lands where these 7 categories of products will be available. Risk assessment. Well, this leads to a dichotomy because, if there is risk, this is the third pillar to be implemented, i.e. risk mitigation. through the collection of information and additional data and audits and certifications, and you name it. And only in this case, so after implementing demonstrable measures and that are clearly verifiable in terms of risk mitigation, the raw, semi-finished or finished products can be produced in the market of the European Union. I was talking about country risk and ranking. This is very important, and this will be defined in terms of levels of riskiness based upon an initiative of the European Commission, and only for high-risk countries it will be required to provide specific documents to document and verify and clarify the presence of a system of due diligence. In other cases, the due diligence system will be instead simplified. So to conclude, what are the open questions / issues in the implementation of this regulation? Well, first of all, the regulation is extremely demanding. There will be difficulties in implementing and monitoring the document, most especially for the very important part that concerns the documentation that the products don't come from forms of forest degradation. There will be winners and losers for sure. The big business mostly has due diligence, and they, have an advantage over small companies. In highly risk countries will have more difficulties in terms of remaining exporters to the European Union. And for this reason, there is the risk of a dual market. EUDR compliant products for the European Union markets and similar markets like the US and the UK, versus the products that don't have a due diligence system for the other markets. Quite obviously, there may be different forms of implementation amongst the countries of the European Union, and this, can mean that there might be shortcuts in some countries before the European Union can uniform the rules. And finally, we also have to consider the problem of the interaction in terms of opportunities and conflicts with the existing initiatives promoted by the civil community. Like in the case of palm oil, there are voluntary initiatives connected to third-party certification, i.e. RSPO. And in this case, the European Commission should be complementary, not competitive with these systems. You should wrap up. Yes, sure. I will briefly hint at the other significant initiatives of the European Commission. The European Commission has in place several initiatives that complete and integrate the others, most especially the Green Claim Initiative and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Initiative. The Green Claim Initiative is a draft directive, and it is very important because, as you can see from this slide, essentially it will eliminate the possibility to use simplistic messages in terms of sustainability. When these sustainability claims will not be underpinned by third-party verifiable standard and will not consider significant sustainability aspects and will not use an LCA approach, well, in these cases, these claims will not be acceptable in the market of the European Union. And this allows me to point out that there is a very important process of focus on overall sustainability without only privileging some like GHG gases. We are headed towards an analysis of the global footprint based upon the life cycle analysis, which does not only relate to production and scope 1 company impacts and the ways in which the company sources energy, but also all that is upstream and downstream of the company. And that is why The European Commission and the member states are developing forms of very important documents and databases like this one, ASviS, the French one, that provides standard indications on the different sustainabilities of the different products. I've searched this database for plant origin oils, and I found this very interesting data in terms of ranking of impacts like climate impacts, based upon which palm oil, when it is documented that it is not connected to deforestation and forest degradation, is the one that has the least impact. And many other indicators are equally important and significant. As a matter of fact, as you can see, in the market, two parallel processes are going on, and they're interesting. One privilege is an environmental communication based upon minimal performance criteria, RSPO, RFC, FSC, sorry, with simplified approaches that are easy to communicate. And then there is another type of communication that is based upon a holistic approach with no indicators and thresholds, but it is based on robust data. In both cases, and this is my conclusion, and I'm positive, we are headed towards communication to consumers that can be used by companies that is more correct and more advanced with no simplistic messages. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor, for your very clear presentation. Now we move on to a topic that is very much related to this. We've talked about geolocation, and so Dr. Luca Foresta, who is an expert of intelligence, will explain to us how this integrated system can facilitate the collection and monitoring of information, including admin and legal information. So it's useful to prepare the documentation necessary to guarantee the lack of deforestation, in particular for the small plantations. Thank you. Over to you. Good morning. Can you hear me and see my presentation? Yes. Thank you. Good morning to all of you, and thank you for having me to present this webinar today. I'll be talking about the theme of the European regulation. It's absolutely current and interesting, so we are glad to take part in this discussion. While I was preparing this documentation, I changed the title. I wanted to be more straightforward and practical because, according to me, many companies right now are wondering, can I or will I be able to sell my products in the European market? And then there are two similar questions. So is my product zero deforestation, and what are the areas at risk in my production chain? And I'd like to analyze these questions from the point of view of two cases. These are not real companies. And there is a crucial factor. Company A that is aware of the geolocation of concessions, government concessions of the land where the asset is produced, like palm oil. And company 2 that is not aware of this information, not in detail, but maybe has only generic knowledge of the region or province of origin of the product. A couple of words on us. Intelligence, whom are we? Well, we deal with monitoring deforestation on a global scale in relation to various agricultural commodities, including also palm oil. And many of the commodities we deal with, as you can see on the slide, are included in the new European regulation. We already work with many clients in various areas, growers, traders, and financial institutions like Rabobank. We have a long experience in various stages of the supply chain of these commodities. I'll briefly explain our approach, but then I'll go back to these two companies, two examples, to give a practical answer to these questions. The approach that we use at Satelligence is synergistic. We use in particular satellite data to be able to monitor and detect deforestation anywhere in the world, and especially in the tropical areas of the planet. But in reality, and this is fundamental, we cross this with other different types of data, including the mapping of commodities and other contextual data, admin and legal in general, or that are specific for the supply chain of a commodity. As regards the monitoring of deforestation, we do that in high spatial resolution on a global geographical scale. And the whole system that we have created is based on cloud computing. So it can be scaled and applied in very large geographical areas. We process petabyte satellite data, and we do that almost in real time. That's important. We can constantly update the product that we offer, and this is vital, and I'll dwell upon this in a moment. One detail. I said that we use satellite data in radar and optical frequency. This is the world that's seen from the space using optical band data. There are many clouds, and for atmosphere circulation reasons, some areas of the planet, including some we want to constantly monitor, are covered by clouds very, very frequently throughout the year. And so it's absolutely fundamental to also use radar data that is much more complex to interpret and more complicated to process, but allows us to analyze and see the soil regardless of the weather conditions and regardless of day and night. So we can see the planet this way more or less every day in the year, depending upon when the satellite passes above a certain area. In geospatial terms, the product that we offer allows to see deforestation in a given area of the planet that is of interest for a reference company. This is in Indonesia for about 1 year of time. Riau, this is the Riau. But not all that appears to be deforestation is real deforestation. In this case, here you see deforestation, but in most of the red areas that you see, in reality, it's just tree felling, absolutely illegal, because a certain commodity has been replanted. And most especially in Latin America, they do so when they fell trees because they want to move to a different commodity. So it's essential to make the difference between tree felling only and deforestation proper. So this is the mapping of commodities. That is fundamental. We want to know where palm oil is produced, or soybean, and we want to be able to detect what is being done on the soil. And this is something we do directly at Satelligence whenever possible. We use data that is publicly available, but in many cases we have to add data produced by ourselves. This is an example, Indonesia as well. This is a mapping, and in yellow you can see oil palm plantations. And in green you see primary forest, secondary forest, and so on and so forth. One last thing that we use, which is one of the most important ones, is the information relating to the production chain. And this is specific for the commodity in question, so palm oil or soybean. And in particular, it's important to cross these data the contextual data that I mentioned earlier, i.e. admin or for protected areas or national, international specific laws to be taken account of. So in the case of company 1 that I mentioned that is aware of geolocation, precise geolocation in terms of where the commodity to be imported is produced, well, in this case, it's relatively easy for us because with all of our data, we can cross-analyze the data with the deforestation that we monitor with satellite data. However, all of this complexity is hidden for the company because the company is offered an app, simple to use, with all of this information on its supply chain. And this, in the event that there is no illegal deforestation, this is a way to prove compliance with the new regulations, European regulations. In red, you can see EUDR and the date, because in this case, the data is calculated starting from that date, but you can also choose different time horizons or other dates that are important, most especially for oil palm, like the RSPO and the NDPE. If instead the supply chain, that I imagine will be the case in most companies, is not completely compliant, you can analyze what elements in the supply chain have an adverse impact in terms of non-compliance with the law. So with a web application, you can see the percentage of deforestation and its performance over time, because there is real-time update with new satellite images and with the new mapping of commodities or new data on the supply chain itself. And you can also see the links to deforestation and suppliers and protected areas. So this is important in terms of, the second part of this regulation that says that if you're not completely compliant, you have to have a risk mitigation plan. So you can use this type of information for that, i.e. to know what the areas at risk in the supply chain are and to decide how to change things in order to be fully compliant in the future. In the case of a company that is not aware of precise geolocation of the areas of production of soybean or palm oil, there are other solutions that can be used. There are at least two that we both use. One is to use a scientific modeling of the logistics chain and find information relating to that. But an approach that I would like to show to you today, and that is become more and more discussed for many types of different commodities, not just palm oil, is the judicial approach, i.e. essentially, we monitor and quantify the deforestation areas in a given geography, in this case Indonesia, and we do so by administrative entity. It can be municipalities or a whole nation or regions or provinces. And inside this admin entity, you can quantify the deforestation in absolute terms, or like here, in relative terms, relative to the deforestation that occurred in the previous years, in order to also see the trend over time, to see if it changes or remains stable. I mean, if there is a steadily high deforestation or if there is a decrease in deforestation. So these means challenges for companies, and like the professor says, most especially for the small companies. So these regulations means significant challenges, but it is possible to monitor essentially in real time the key data relating to the supply chain. But at the same time, a company can afford not to get lost in the tales of complexity. Through our data, it is possible to reduce complexity to a simple declaration of traceability, which is a simple declaration of conformity with the new regulation, or obtain the information that put us on the right track to arrive at that declaration of conformity. And with that, I'm done. And I thank you so much for having me here to discuss this. Thank you so much. Very clear. So we've seen how we can move from, a system, like the professor said, to practical instruments to help large companies and especially small growers, smallholders who are most at risk of not being compliant with the regulations. We'll dig deeper into that in the upcoming webinar when we will be talking about this talk. Now, the floor goes to the analysis of the risk of deforestation with the potential emissions of GHG. So Maria Vincenza Chiriacò, senior researcher of the climate change impact on agriculture, forests and ecosystem services division of the Euro-Mediterranean Center for Climate Changes, CMCC. Good morning. I hope you can see and hear me well. Is that the case? Can you confirm? Yes, perfect. Great. So give me a moment. I cannot see myself, but it's okay. Okay, so as was said, I'll be talking about a study we are conducting to understand what the risk of deforestation is and what are the potential greenhouse gas emissions from vegetable oils. So a short overview. Globally, we produce over 200 million tons of oil, plant oil per year. And of this, palm oil and palm oil kernel account for 40% of the global production, followed by soybean, rapeseed, and sunflower, 28, 12, and 9%. As Professor Pettenella said, some of these oil crops are amongst the main drivers of deforestation, together with other commodities like meat and timber, coffee and cocoa. But oil palm and oil from soybean are the main culprits, so to speak. Palm oil is the most used vegetable oil and the most criticized one due to the deforestation and loss of primary forests for the expansion of palm oil plantations in the past decades, most especially Indonesia and Malaysia, where palm oil is mainly produced. They account for approximately 80% of palm oil production. So this strong criticism against palm oil has produced two different responses, and most especially in terms of its use in the food sector. Because on the one hand, some players of the agro-food sector decided to produce or use deforestation-free certified palm oil, so not coming from a supply chain that provides for deforestation. On the other hand, other players have chosen to replace palm oil with other edible vegetable oils, such as soybean, rapeseed, and sunflower oil, because these three oils are most widely available and because their characteristics, organoleptic characteristics, are similar to palm oil, and so they can be a replacement, a possible replacement of palm oil. So we wondered which is the best solution, i.e. to use deforestation-free certified palm oil or replace palm oil with other edible vegetable oils. And we wonder what is the better of the two, most especially considering the potential risk of deforestation and the total GHG emissions. So, if you will, this study is forward-looking because the previous presentation by Intelligence has shown how we can trace what goes on. But these instead are forward-looking scenarios. What could happen in the future if we chose one of the two options? So we have figured out future scenarios in terms of use of deforestation-free certified palm oil or replace palm oil with a mix of 3 oils, soybean, rapeseed, and sunflower. And we have analyzed the production and the risk of deforestation and the total emissions that could be generated in the 3 main producer countries of these oils. So Brazil, the USA and Argentina for soybean, Canada, China and India for rapeseed, Russia, Ukraine and Argentina for sunflower oil. We've analyzed the various data set. We've determined the quantity of these oils to replace palm oil, and we've determined the additional area to be cultivated with these oils to replace palm oil. And to do that, we've built an expansion algorithm based upon a number of criteria and data sets which are available globally, and that are mainly based on the criterion of exclusion. So we have hypothesized that in case of an expansion of the other replacement oils, this expansion never happens in protected areas, indigenous lands, and areas already harvested with the target oilseed crop, and areas with low suitability for the target oilseed crop. And then we've also identified inclusion criteria. In this case, we've considered all possible land uses, including forests, quite obviously, in our analysis targets. And then we've defined priority criteria. So this expansion of alternative oils happens through a spatial dynamics with priority criteria, assuming first that the expansion happens in areas close to the areas already cultivated with the target oilseed crop, and then higher suitability to the target oilseed crop, and then closeness to road infrastructure, because we've assumed that this expansion happens more easily if there is, a road infrastructure to harvest the seeds and transport them. So this is a map that we've obtained. You can see the expansion maps, the potential expansion maps that we could have in the future if we wanted to replace palm oil with these oils in the 3 main producing countries. So there are green, yellow, and red areas. The green ones represent the potential expansion of that oil crop if we wanted to replace 25% of palm oil. The yellow ones are added to the green ones if we wanted to replace 50% of palm oil with that oil crop, and the red ones are added to the previous 2 if we wanted to replace 100% of palm oil. So what does the map say? It says lots of things, but it tells us that this expansion of the other oil crops in these countries could involve a certain forest area. From 22 to 43 million hectares of forests are at risk of deforestation in these countries. We could also say worldwide, because they cover most of the production, but this could increase if we consider really all countries. This is really interesting because there are hectares of forest that are at high risk of deforestation if we replaced by 25%, 50%, or 100% palm oil. But our target was also to understand what are the total GHG emissions. So if an expansion is in a forest, we've also analyzed the carbon stock in those forests, which after an agricultural expansion would be lost. So in this case, we've used the forest resource assessment data, 2020 data, plus all of the man-made emissions along the production cycle. So we've done an LCA analysis, in this case with a carbon footprint only. So we've considered all of the inputs for the production of the 3 alternative oils, including palm oil in terms of fertilizers and manure, and the consumption of diesel. And so we've built an inventory of the emissions that add to those relating to the loss of a forest. So these are the results. Here you can see that here we have the palm oil in Malaysia and Indonesia, and soybean, rapeseed, and sunflower in each of the countries analyzed. What you can easily see is that palm oil is always the one that has lower emissions per ton produced as compared to all of the other oils in all of the countries. In particular, the blue part of the bar relates to the life cycle assessments emissions, and the green part of the bar represents the potential emissions from deforestation. Why potential? They are represented in a slightly different manner in the bars. This is because we've also briefly analyzed the actual potential of deforestation by analyzing the historical deforestation trends and also the policies of each of these countries to protect the forest. So in some countries like Brazil, Argentina, unfortunately, here the risk of deforestation is very high, and instead in other countries like Russia and Ukraine, it would seem that there are protection policies. So also in the US, this risk is lower. Other than that, we can see that palm oil is one of the best in terms of tons of CO2 per ton of oil produced. And most especially if we replace 1 ton of palm oil with the other oils, the emissions of GHG could go up by 31% if we replace 100% of palm oil with other oils. Instead, if we consider the production of palm oil that is deforestation free, this green part in these 2 bars would go to 0. We would have an 89% reduction of the current emissions from palm oil. So our initial question, is it better to use deforestation-free certified palm oil, or is it better to replace palm oil with the other plant oils? Well, obviously the answer is that in terms of reduced risk of deforestation and in terms of global emissions, the best solution is to use deforestation-free certified palm oil. This is the best solution based upon our analysis. Thank you, very clear. So we could say, we can confirm that the best alternative to palm oil is sustainable palm oil. Yes, exactly, that's it. You know, there's a huge discussion, and the best alternative to palm oil is to continue to use palm oil, providing that it comes from a deforestation-free supply oil, and the other oils might cause worse problems compared to what we've seen in the past in terms of deforestation. Okay, let's move on to the last presentation by Eva Lessi, head of Sustainability WWS, and WWSF is one of the founding members of the RSPO, and she will tell us the point of view of WWF on this topic, i.e. on how palm oil can be an issue, but can become the solution, providing it is sustainable for the environment as well as for the society. Over to you. Good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Can you see my presentation? Perfectly. Thank you. So my presentation has the same conclusions of Dr. Chiriacò, who preceded me. But I would like to start by telling you why today we have to talk about palm oil and why we have to talk about sustainability. You know that almost nothing is unlimited in the planet, most especially when it comes to resources. It's a lesson that mankind has a hard time understand because it overexploits what nature offers. And now the consequences are very visible more than ever. And in 2022, this was confirmed by the 6th planetary boundary is crossed study. So we have crossed even the 6th planetary boundary, i.e. the freshwater resource. These thresholds should never have been crossed if we wanted to preserve the ecosystems and live in conditions that are favorable to our life. This is an alarming data and reminds us of the actual impact of our actions on the planet, and science has never been clearer. You've heard from all of the previous panelists that scientific data tells us a truth. There is a lot of data, robust data, and this data tells us that we are going through a decisive decade for the future of mankind on Earth. I work for the largest environmentalist organization in the world. The challenge is huge. WWF tries and tackle it, identifying big goals worldwide. So to stop the loss of biodiversity and natural habitats and to stop the extinctions triggered by man by stabilizing and increasing the natural populations and halving the ecological footprint of our production and consumption system, and by halving the production of GHG. We do so working on several fronts, and maybe you don't really know how much WWF today is focused on forests as well as the food systems. We work on energy and pollution, and we also work on food systems. Why? Because today, food systems, I mean, the production of the commodities that participate in our daily diet, like, for example, palm oil, today have a serious problem because 3/4 of the land environment and 2/3 of the marine environment have been significantly modified by man activities, and over 1/3 of the Earth's surface and 75% of the freshwater resources are now used for the production of crops or for animal breeding, and 80% of the loss of biodiversity globally is caused by agriculture and the global food system. And extinction relates to terrestrial and marine species. And today, agriculture consumes 40% of the Earth's surface. And it is the one that uses most land by far, and most of these 40% includes the best lands, but that's not enough. Agriculture, in order to create all of the commodities we need, is further expanding. And where? It mainly expands inside tropical forests, the savannas, which are fundamental for the stability of the planet, most especially as carbon stocks and reserves of biodiversity. And in 2019, but this was confirmed later on, as much as 90% of the tropical deforestation was caused by the expansion of agricultural land, and we have lost, if we want to put it simply, so we've lost every 6 seconds an area of rainforest as big as a soccer field. And the previous speakers have said about the 7 giants that dominate the world deforestation. We've heard about bovine, cocoa, coffee, rubber, and timber. They are responsible for an unbelievable deforestation, most especially in our forests. And also as regards GHG, they, we're mentioned about the reduction of deforestation, but we know that today the food system uses, or better, emits 37% of all anthropogenic emissions of GHG, and it's one of the main culprits for climate change. So all of these problems, all of these numbers put together reminds us that it is important today to also act on agriculture and the expansion of agriculture. And if we want to talk about how this is important, well, we should take a look at the data and see how an inversion of the trend is absolutely urgent for the present as well as for the future of people in Italy and elsewhere in the world. And we should remember a thing that we often forget, i.e., our health is indissolubly connected to that of the ecosystems from which we depend. We have to trigger significant change, huge changes, to immediately adopt a sustainable future, starting from how we produce and consume food. So we've talked about GHG, and the world cannot stop the impact of global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels without ending deforestation and conversion of all of the supply chains of global commodities. We have to transform all of our production systems to meet demand, but sustainably. You've heard a lot about the numbers of palm oil. Palm oil has its numbers, but if produced in a non-irresponsible manner, and you've heard about that, it can have different impacts on forest species and communities with dramatic consequences on climate change. And today, Indonesia and Malaysia, as we've heard, account for almost 85% of the global supply. And there are over 40 more countries that produce this commodity. And what arrives in our country mainly comes from Malaysia and Indonesia, even though there are large proportions of South American products. And despite the production advantages and versatility of the product, the conventional production, i.e. non-sustainable production of palm oil, still presents many problems. We've heard about tropical rainforests and peat areas, and they are large carbon stocks. So if they are destroyed, this is bad for biodiversity. New plantations are responsible for 1% of global emissions of GHG, and then the use of fertilizers and the use of fuels as regards machinery, transportation and processing, and chemicals that are used in plantations. I mean, they can pollute the surrounding areas. So the conventional production of palm oil is also filled with social challenges all along the supply chain. So there are also conflicts between communities, and there are also cases of, unequal salaries and unsafe work conditions. So what is WWF's vision, to close the day about palm oil? Our vision says that it is necessary to stop the conversion of natural ecosystems by ensuring that the production, trade, and consumption of palm oil are responsible, so that palm oil can protect and restore all of the landscapes and bring benefits to people and nature. So oil with known origin, traceable, without converting forests, and respecting forests and agricultural practices that are respectful and that preserve peat areas and don't come from the conversion of plantations of areas subject to wildfires, and that also protect the right of workers and local communities with a free informed consent to promote the development of smallholders and that are independent. We've been talking for a long time about boycotting palm oil. In 2015, in Italy, there was the largest boycotting campaign against this oil that suddenly disappeared from food products. We were headed in the food sector towards certification, and then this oil disappeared, and it even became a label in an extreme simplification. But like Dr. Chiriacò said, boycotting is not the most effective solution. Suffice it to say that it is the single most efficient oil, and that uses from 4 to 10 times less land. If the production of palm oil decreased, if we stopped using it, the impacts would be elsewhere in other value chains that are even less efficient than this oil and this production, with consequences that could be even worse because of the versatility of this oil. The shift to other oils might not be doable. So, in order to address all of the challenges and encourage a sustainable production of palm oil all along the value chains, it is important to remember that the phenomenon of deforestation, by the way, is not only related to palm oil, but to agriculture as a whole, including other oil crops. And so the sustainability certification should be for many other commodities as well, on top of palm oil, because palm oil is very advanced in terms of certification. And if we used other oils instead, there could be worse problems or problems elsewhere. Today, we have several types of certifications to define the best practices and provide guidance and verify sustainable production. We have so many bodies. RSPO, WWF believes that the RSPO is the most complete and robust and broadly known standard, and also the most used one. And today, if I'm not wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the members of the RSPO are 5,000 in all the world. So growers, producers of commodities, investors, and NGOs. The area is growing, and today this area should be about 4.5 million hectares, and the production continues to increase and grow. And WWF every year evaluates how and to what extent companies respond to this call to arms to avoid the conversion and destruction of forests and move on to certified sustainable palm oil. So there is a palm oil scorecard that is an examination of the main retailers and producers of commodities and food service companies, including all of the main global brands. And on these, WWF has raised the bar in terms of expectations vis-a-vis these companies, so that these companies define and start actions that can accelerate the solution for the environmental and climate challenges, moving on towards a palm oil that is sustainable. With that, I'm done, and I thank you for your attention. Dr. Fontana, we cannot hear you. You're muted. Okay, thank you. Very clear and incisive. One last question. We've seen that sustainable palm oil is important, both for sustainability of the environment and for that of the local communities. But what can be the benefits for the retailers? So what are the recommendations of WWF for companies? Well, all of these sectors and markets of the palm oil industry must urgently start actions that are effective in terms of creating supply chains that protect the forests, the ecosystems, as well as the local communities. As we've seen in my first slide, this decade is absolutely strategic for the future of the planet. And so what WWF suggests and asks is that companies accept their responsibilities and promote a sustainable palm oil sourcing, including broad, courageous and rapid actions, more so than they've done up until now. So today it is possible to bring about a change of the whole sector by purchasing increasingly significant amount of certified sustainable palm oil whose supply chain is in line with the criteria of the RSPO. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the participants and speakers. We will have 2 more webinars on this topic, the first on the 16th of May, and we'll be talking about inclusion, innovation, cooperation. And so we'll be talking about ethical and social sustainability with the participation of Solidaridad, the ONG, and on the 23rd of May. Instead, we'll have 1 more session that will be about certification, greenwashing, and responsible consumption with the participation of Cittadinanza Attiva. Thank you all, and have a great day ahead. Thank you, and goodbye.